Welcome back to the C Morning Show right here only on C Today. Now this Sunday we have a very interesting talk show that revolves around health, and artificial intelligence can diagnose breast cancer faster and more accurate than the human eye. The leading engine is made by Panakeya, a startup built by Pahini Pandya, who earned a postdoctorate from the University of Cambridge, and Pandu Raharja-Liu, an artificial intelligence researcher.
Right. Now, the pair realized that tiny differences in the appearance of cancer cells, which can only be detected by a computer, can reveal important information about their molecular state and the likely best treatment options.
And his works have allowed Pandu Raharja-Liu to be on the list of 30 under 30 Forbes Europe 2022, which is absolutely good news for Indonesia. And to know more about this and his works, we are now connected with Pandu Raharja-Liu, who is currently in London, the United Kingdom. Good morning from Indonesia, Pandu. I mean, it's late at night where you are, 1:25 a.m.
Right.
Is that right? Yes, so thank you so much for taking the time to join us this very early morning, both where you are and where we are.
Right.
How are you doing over in Europe?
I'm good. Thanks, Karina and Rahman.
Very great. All right, let's jump into it. Pandu, first of all, we'd like to extend our congratulations on making it to the list of 30 under 30 for Forbes Europe 2022. That is completely amazing, and you must be proud. We, Indonesia, are very proud of you. And with that being said, could you please tell us briefly about this achievement?
Sure. Yeah. First, thanks for having me. I think at this point we probably know that Forbes is running an annual list of 30 under 30 or people who are under 30 across various area who are showing either a very promising or great achievement. And I think 3 weeks ago I was notified by my colleagues that I was put as they're in their list of healthcare and science in Europe for 2022. And yeah, I think that was like a very interesting things to have.
Okay, obviously. Now, we want to know more, Pandu, about this Panakeya Technologies, and why are you so concerned about, biomarker profiling itself? Because if it's related to cancer itself, obviously it's a general that we know here in Indonesia. The types of cancer treatment could be like surgery. There's also radiation, targeted immunotherapy, and hormone therapies, right? So what is so specific and so special about a biomarker profiling?
Sure. So if you think about the way cancer is being treated in the modern time, there is no such thing as you have breast cancer.
Right.
More likely you have a certain profile of breast cancer. What kind of biomarkers? Let's say in breast cancer, there are three important biomarkers: the ER, PR, and HER2. And what happened is, depending on the type of biomarkers that you have, you would actually undergo a very different sort of regime of treatment. The reason for that is, depending if you have, let's say, ER positive, you would actually undergo a ER positive treatment. If you have HER2 positive, there's a very famous treatment for breast cancer that is only intended for HER2 positive. So in a modern time, you never have cancer treatment only for breast cancer. Most likely you will have a certain specific breast cancer, and the only way, or the modern time, or the modern way you would figure that out is if you undergo a molecular and genetic test based on your tissue. So that is actually a very time consuming and expensive. Even in UK, even in Indonesia, even in India. My co-founder is from India. Molecular test is extremely time consuming. It could take all the way to 3 months. It could be very, very expensive. In UK, it costs on average £500, which is around 10 million, I think.
Wow.
And it is, if you think about, if you are actually, you have cancer, but you don't know what kind of cancer do you have.
Right.
Waiting for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks is actually a very taxing and mentally challenging for you and your family.
Yes.
So that's like what we intend to So initially, I have a very long history of cancer. As you can imagine, my grandparents, my moms, and my aunts and my uncles. The same thing with my co-founder. She had gone through this sort of like scare, sort of like a journey of waiting and knowing, A,
Yeah.
if you have cancer, or B, what kind of cancer you have. And what we intend to do initially is like we want to actually automate that by developing artificial intelligence technologies to profile your cancer or cancer very, very rapidly. Instead of days and weeks, we can do it within minutes. So that's what we do.
Right. And as you've mentioned there, Pandu, especially having been through the experience of cancer with your loved ones, with your family, and I'm sure a lot of people out there as well who is going through cancer with their families or loved ones. I think what's matter most to them is knowing how much time they have left
Right.
with their loved ones, right?
Yes.
And as you've mentioned before, I think it's innovative that you've made artificial intelligence that can generate cancer biomarker profiles in not just days, but minutes, just to be more precise about it. Can you tell us more about it, as you've mentioned before?
Sure. So the way the cancer journey, I think probably I'm gonna give a context on how the things work and where we sit in the current patient journey. So what happened is if you have a cancer, or if you think you have cancer, you would go to cancer hospitals and they would do this radiography scan, MRI, CT, mammography. You might have seen these black and white images, and what happened is based on those initial assessment, you would sort of understand, or the radiologist and oncologist will sort of understand if you might have cancer, and the
Right.
sample from the body is taken, and that is then prepared and analyzed by pathologists. This is again another specialty medical profession, and they would then come up with a primary diagnosis in pretty much telling that you have a cancer, and it is highly it looks very different than normal tissue, which usually means like it is very aggressive, and they might tell you if it has spread to nearby organ or not.
Right.
And that is like what is called primary diagnosis. Primary diagnosis is pretty much telling if you have cancer. But as I mentioned before, right, for the clinicians to be able to diagnose or to treat your cancer, they need to understand what kind of cancer it is. And the modern way of doing that is, for them to do the molecular and genetic test. Think about the PCR. We all know what PCR is nowadays because of COVID. Think about the molecular staining, trying to understand what kind of profile does it have. The reason being, as I said before, depending on if you have certain profile, you might actually qualify for different treatments. And what we do is, based on the sample that pathologists actually analyze, we can provide all these biomarkers that would otherwise be coming from the molecular test. So we can actually short circuit, bypass all this expensive and time-consuming molecular test. That's what we do as a company.
Right. So in other words, is it true or not? So you can actually know if it's a malignant, a benign, a stage 1 till 4, correct?
Yeah. So the staging, the malignancy, the mutation status is
Right.
important for a lot of cancer. Lung cancer, breast cancer, colorectal. The clinicians usually want to know, right? Do you actually have that mutation, the BRAF and the BRCA, etc., which are actually impacting the survival. You mentioned before about the survival and how the clinicians need to act accordingly. We can actually tell, do you have a mutation?
Yeah.
We can even tell actually, would you have a good survival in the baseline scenario? And what clinician can do is, they would actually be able to treat it more aggressively so that, they make sure that the cancer is gone or something.
Okay. Now, how accurate, Pandu, is your artificial intelligence at rating breast cancer scans, just to compare to, human experts, maybe?
Sure. So we're not comparing ourselves against human experts. We're comparing against the existing tests, so the PCR and the molecular staining. We recently did a clinical validation with our partners in UK, and we also are running some clinical trials in additional clinical trial in UK and Europe. And the results indicate that our performance is actually comparable, if not slightly better. So what it means is, we can actually replace those tests with our computational artificial intelligence test. So we also have a currently a preprint, which is currently under review in a good journal, a leading journal in cancer. And hopefully within the next few weeks, we would know if the preprint, the manuscript is accepted for that publication or not.
Right. And Pandu, I know you've mentioned this innovation is able to detect various cancers, but do you think in the future it will be able to detect other types of illnesses or diseases, would you say?
Sure. So right now we focus mostly on cancer, as you can imagine, because a most of the biomarker of precision treatment in the modern clinical settings mostly focus on cancer, and most of the diseases that rely on tissue base that is taken from the patient diagnosis is cancer. However, we have been working a lot with our clinical partners in, again, in Europe and UK, in America, to figure out which sort of other disease modalities that we can expand to. We have seen externally that there are some diseases that we can expand to. Internally, there are a lot of cancer types that we think we can expand to beyond what we currently work on, which is the breast cancer, colorectal, and head and neck and lung. So the first instance, like, we would expand to pretty much every type of solid cancer, and then beyond that, we are going to do expansion around other diseases that rely on biomarkers. So there should not be any concerns, or there shouldn't be any problem on expanding these areas. We know that our platforms work very well on any diseases that rely on tissue. We are currently working, for example, on human papillomavirus, the HPV.
Yep.
That is not cancer, but rely actually on tissue diagnostics, and we know that our solution actually works very well on that area. So, in a sense, there is nothing limiting us from those, and we're also working on that. And yeah, in the future, we hope that we can work in pretty much any area where tissue diagnosis is actually being utilized.
Right. We're really curious here in the studio. How long have you been, you and your team, so to speak, been studying about this biomarker, and what's been the hardest or obstacle in building a healthcare artificial intelligence startup?
Sure. So the company has been around for 3.5 years. I
Right.
think it's going 4 years this year. Myself, I have worked on this area. Previously, I was looking into the morphology of the cancer tissue and looking into to what kind of extent can the treatment work on that patient. So in a sense, predicting the response to treatment. Let's say if you have cancer, based on the tissue, or our method that I developed at the time can tell if you would respond very well to that
Right.
treatment. There have been a lot of evidence nowadays showing that you can actually learn a lot from the morphology, from the way the tissue looks like. My co-founder works on same way, more on the molecular and wet lab, sort of like a classical biological lab, trying to understand how molecular dynamics such as mutation actually influence the morphology, the way the tissue looks like. So in a sense, this has been a ongoing research for a while. I was previously developing, medical device and AI applications and software, and that were deployed worldwide. But yeah, as a company, we have been working for 2.5 years, and we hope that we continue and expand to other cancer area, of course.
Wow, very interesting, Pandu. Thanks for that. Now, before we wrap up, we've just got one last question. What are Panakea's technology's goals or targets, would you say, in the near future?
Sure. So in terms of target, of course, we would like the solution to be deployed in clinical setting. We're currently running various clinical validations across UK and Europe with our clinical partners, leading hospitals in these two regions. We are expanding our collaborations as well. We're working with various leading cancer hospitals in the US. We're looking into Asia. We could recently received a interest from one of the largest cancer hospitals in India, for example. So what we want to do is, of course, we want to prove that the solution works, that the solution is effective. It can reduce the number of tests. It can reduce the cost of cancer diagnosis. It can reduce the number, the sort of like timeline, right? We mentioned about
Yeah.
reducing the waiting time, the turnaround time from months to hours, literally. We also want to show a cost reduction because cancer diagnostic is extremely expensive, as I mentioned before. And hopefully, once it's successful, we would like to expand or have the product adopted worldwide. On top of that, of course, you mentioned about other non-cancer area.
Yeah.
We would like to expand beyond our current medical device
Of
use
course.
cases, which is
Yeah.
breast, colorectal, etc. So expanding use cases, expanding geography, expanding beyond cancer. I think that's like the three stages I would think.
Wow.
Okay, so
Well
hopefully
said.
this expansion will
Yes.
come, pretty soon, right?
Absolutely. Well, good luck, Pandu. Thank you so much for taking the time this very early morning to come and chat with us. All the very best, and we can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you, Pandu. Have a good
Thank you,
rest.
Pandu.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was very interesting. That was Pandu Raharja-Liu from the United Kingdom, right?